Dear friends, welcome to this week's virtual Drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege to read Parshas Korach. And in the Parsha we read of the dramatic, tragic rebellion of Korach against the leadership of Moshe, Aaron, and ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Mefarshim are all plagued by the same question. How could Korach do this? Right? Rashi says, Korach Pikeach Haya. Korach Pikeach Haya. He was a smart man. He was a righteous man. The Lubavitch Rebbe says the fact that we named the Parsha Parshas Korach indicates to us that Korach was a good man. What he wanted was good. He wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. He wanted greater Kedusha. So how did he get so messed up? How did he make so many wrong turns to lead to him, his followers swallowed up by the earth, entire families, entire mishpachas destroyed? How could this have happened? What led to the breakdown that ultimately resulted in the death of Korach and his followers? How could someone so wise and seemingly so righteous make such poor life decisions? There's a beautiful story that is told about the great tzaddik, the Mat Ephraim. The Mat Ephraim was Rav Ephraim Zalman Margolios, or Margulies, who lived from 1762 to 1828. The Mat Ephraim was not only a great Talmud Chacham and a Mechaber Saram, an author of many halachic works, but the Mat Ephraim was also independently wealthy. He owned a bank. So the story is told that one day the Mat Ephraim was sitting in his dining room, learning, and he had a beautiful break front filled with silver and with crystal, mamish magnificent. And something happened, the break front shook, and the most beautiful and exquisite and expensive piece of crystal came tumbling down to the floor and smashed in a whole bunch of pieces. The Rebbitzin, the Mat Ephraim's wife, hears the commotion from the other room. She comes running in. She sees the beautiful, magnificent, expensive piece of crystal laying in a million pieces on the floor, and she lets out like a gasp. Oh my gosh! Meanwhile, the Mat Ephraim is sitting there learning his sefer. He looks up, he looks back down, and he continues on his thing. So his wife doesn't understand. So the Rebbitzin goes over to Mat Ephraim. She says, "Excuse me, Mat Ephraim." She probably didn't call Mat Ephraim, but excuse me, husband, don't you see what happened? The most beautiful, exquisite, expensive piece of crystal we have just came tumbling down and smashed in a million pieces. So what's going on over here? What's going on? How are you so stoic? How are you not reacting to this? So the Mat Ephraim turns to her and he says like this. He says, "To be honest, let's not talk about it now. Come back to me in a year from now, and we'll discuss this particular episode. I'll explain to you my reaction." So the Rebbitzin marks off the yard site of the crystal utensil on the calendar, and again, time goes by quickly. The eve of the yard site comes. The Rebbitzin sees on her calendar that it's marked off. She comes back to Mat Ephraim. She says, "Okay, husband, you told me in a year from now we're going to discuss this. I'm curious to understand your unusually stoic and unemotional reaction to the breakage and to the loss of this incredibly exquisite, expensive, and beautiful piece of crystal." So the Rebbe says, so the Mat Ephraim says to his Rebbe, and he says, "Let me ask you." He says, "Does it still bother you? I remember when it broke, you were so upset, you were beside yourself. Maybe it was a family heirloom, or if it wasn't a family heirloom, very exquisite and unique and expensive." The Mat Ephraim says to his wife, "Tell me, does it still bother you?" She said, "To be honest, no, I actually forgot about it. The only reason actually I came back to you is because last year when it happened, I marked the yard site of the crystal goblet, the crystal vase, whatever it was, the crystal utensil, on the calendar. So now that I saw it on the calendar, that's why I came back to you. But the truth is, if it wasn't on the calendar, I would have forgotten all about it. The Mat Ephraim says, "Exactly." He says, "Let me tell you how I approach life," says the Mat Ephraim to his rabbis and to his wife. He says, "When something happens that I get upset about, something happens that I feel like is very jarring or upsetting, before I lose my temper, or before I get upset, or before I get angry, I ask myself a simple question. Is this the type of thing that in a year from now, I would still be angry? Is this the kind of event that in a year from now, I would still have an acute emotional and visceral reaction? Is this the kind of event that is going to elicit from me a heightened emotional response, even along with the passage of time? Or is it the kind of event that maybe is upsetting a little bit now, but if I just give it some time, I'm really just going to forget all about it?" So the Mat Ephraim says, if it falls into the first category, if it's something I'm not going to be upset in a year from now about, then I choose not to get upset about it now either, because it shows that it's not really all that important. If it's the kind of event that I say, "Oh, I'm going to be angry about this, or upset about this, or just crushed about this fear," okay, then I'll allow myself to feel a little bit more emotion about it right now as well. So the Mat Ephraim says, "I know that the crystal vase was very expensive. It was a beautiful, exquisite, expensive, unique piece of crystal. But I also know that as upsetting as it is right now, in a couple of days, okay, not days, weeks, months, I'm gonna forget about it. But certainly, again, with a year, it won't even be floating in my mind at all. So because I knew that I would forget about it, it wouldn't be unimportant to me later on, I chose not to get upset about it now. So such an incredibly profound and incredible lesson about how to gauge and how to temper the way that we react to things. So often in life, things happen and they elicit a certain feeling of pain, of anger, of negativity, and I'm ready to respond right then and there. And perhaps, and we do it, this happens to all of us, and then we respond and we react. And then what happens very often in life is that sometime later on, I look back at it like, that was an exaggerated response. I did not need to say that. I did not need to act that way. I did not need to behave that way. Okay, I know it felt of crucial importance that I say something, that I respond in a certain way, b'shas ma'aso, when the event occurred. But now at the passage of time, I realize, you know what? It wasn't all that important. And herein lies Korach's failure. Korach was upset. And like the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, the sadness or the upsetness, maybe even the anger or the feeling of being slighted, actually came from a good place. He wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. He wanted to be the high priest. That's what he wanted. Korach wanted more for himself. He wanted more kedusha. He wanted more responsibility. He wanted a heightened level of what he perceived as a heightened level of closeness. He wanted all the right things. But what Korach should have done is take a deep breath, Korach. Before you respond, and before you react, and before you go ahead and you level accusations and you lash out, take a deep breath and ask yourself, if you settle into your beautifully designed divine role, remember his part of Shevet Kasi was a very important man, in a year from now, is this still going to bother you? Do you think you'll still have the same visceral reaction to the appointment of your family members to elevated positions of power and you feeling that you were glossed over? Or maybe you'll find beautiful, happy, and holy contentment in the role that you've been given. Had Korach just taken a few moments to gauge his response and to use the Mata Ephraim litmus test, will I still be upset about this in a year from now? Had he done that, I'd like to think that Korach would not have reacted the way that he did. And Korach would not have felt slighted. And Korach would have said, okay, I'm a little upset now, but you know what? I'm not going to say anything. Let me give it a little bit of time. Let me see how everything settles. And with that passage of time, and with the settling of events, and with Korach finding fulfillment and beautiful self-actualization in his divinely designated role, he could have saved himself, his family, and his followers from incredible and overwhelming destruction. And dear friends, what a profound lesson for us as well. Things happen in life each and every day that upset us, that annoy us. Sometimes we're embarrassed by people, chas v'shalom, humiliated by people, angered, mistreated by people. And it is so often the reflexive reaction to respond, to jump, to do, right? Because in that moment when you respond, you feel good. In that moment when you respond, you feel like you're taking back the power. And then what happens to so many of us, I can only speak from my own life experience. I look back and I'm like, I just didn't need to say that. I just didn't need to do that. I didn't need to behave in that way. I didn't need to take the revenge. I didn't need to say the smart aleck comeback. I didn't need to use that type of wording. I didn't need to give back sharp or biting words. I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to behave in that way. I didn't need to respond in that way. But then the cat's out of the bag. It's done already. And it's too late to take it back. The failure of Korach wasn't a failure in what he wanted. What he wanted was so beautiful. What he wanted was so good. And what he wanted really highlighted his desire for a heightened level of Kedusha. Korach's mistake is that he reacted without thought. He reacted viscerally and emotionally instead of asking himself, will I still be upset about this in a year from now? Or maybe right now, there have been some appointments, I'm upset, I feel jaded, I feel glossed over. Let me sit on it a little bit. Let me take it in a little bit. Let me pause a little bit before I respond. And then Emirat Hashem see kind of how things play out. The mistake of Korach was reflexive, immediate response in the face of an uncomfortable situation. And dear friends, we have to make sure to avoid that same type of pitfall in life as well. Things happen each and every day to us. from people who we love, from people who we don't love, from family, from friends, in the workplace, in shul, wherever we may be. And the best thing we could do for ourselves is to apply the Mata Ephraim rule. When something happens in life, before I respond, ask myself, will I be upset about this in a year from now? If the answer is yes, okay, then maybe it does warrant some type of controlled response. But I would venture to say that often the answer 9 out of 10 times is no. In a year from now, this unpleasant event is not going to matter at all. Mata Ephraim teaches if that's the case, better not to react. Better to hold my tongue. Better to hold back my words. Better not to respond. Better not to retaliate. That's how we live a meaningful and fulfilling life. That's how we avoid the pitfalls of Korach. That's how we prevent ourselves from getting drawn into unnecessary machlokas. That's how we prevent ourselves from literally siphoning off our time and our energy to deal with things that are totally unimportant, and instead conserve that same time, that same energy for our own self-advancement, for our own accomplishment. Korach's failures teach us how to be successful. Internalize the metric of the Mata Ephraim and put yourself on the path to successful living. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.